Just got this in. So this is the ToolkitRC M8 or the Hobbymate D6 Elite. It is a smart charger and a utility for hobby electronics. This is a really powerful item, an all-in-one package here. So not only can you use this as a 300 watt 15 amp charger, it's also a step-up power supply, a receiver tester, a battery resistance checker, so much more here. And there's a lot to cover. So I've broken it down into sections to make it more organized for you to watch this video. If you want to jump to a specific overview of a feature, please check the description below for the timestamp. Let's go over battery charging. So overall, the charge option interface is pretty straightforward. It has slots to save different charge profiles, as you can see here, and it supports different types of batteries. You can choose LiPo, NIMH, all various kinds of batteries. For the charge modes, we have our standard storage charge, discharge, regular charge, balance charge. You could set the charge amperage up to 15 amps. And it can just charge at 2 amps. I'm going to show you the output parallel charging some 4-cell batteries that I have here. So I'm going to plug this parallel charge board into the ToolkitRC. Okay. Yep, and we're going to charge, because these are 4-cell batteries, it picked it up. We're going to charge to 16.8 volts. So there we go, I have about 12.3 amps with these 4-cell batteries, and I'm putting in about 190, 200, near 200 watts, around 200 watts of input from my power supply, which again, that is to be expected because I am not running a 24 volt power supply. So if you want to get the full 15 amps out of this, you need to be running a 24 volt power supply. Now, it doesn't take long for the fans to kick in. As you can see, the temperature here is rising. We're going up to 50 degrees C, and it keeps going up. Now, a negative point about the charging process is the fans. You can already hear them. They're going off. We've got 2 fans back here. There's 2 fans back here, and they are pretty darn loud. So because the fans on this thing are very loud, I would have to say that if you're going to use this somewhere, don't use it in a place where this fan noise would annoy you or somebody else. I also noticed that occasionally the amp output, even though there's nothing wrong with my power supply, it seems like it'll drop the amps that are going into it. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but I will notice that the amps will just dip for whatever reason. I'm not really sure why that happens, but it doesn't seem to really significantly impact the charging time. Let's see, that was an example. It went down to 6 amps just for a second there and then kicked right back up to 12.3 amps. More importantly, let's talk about charge accuracy. Just how accurate is this charger? So I don't have any advanced tools to check for charge accuracy. I simply compared it against my ISDT T8's factory calibration, which I've been charging with for over a year now. And there's about a 0.02 volt variance. That's 2/100ths of a volt. It's not great, but not terrible either. The thing is, I don't believe either of the chargers are truly perfect. What I was mainly looking for was to ensure that none of the cells was above 0.2 or 0.3 at absolute maximum. And we're talking tenths, not hundredths. So, you always want to check any new device like this, if you can, against one that you trust. And I was okay with the results. Now, with respect to the charge cycle itself, I only have one little issue with it, and I feel like it's that the fast charging finish seems to take forever. I just feel like this unit seems to take a little longer time than others. They need to improve whatever routine it is that does this fast charging finish, but otherwise, in general, it will get to the end, it will balance the cells out. So I have no other complaints about the charge itself delivered to the batteries. It still gets its job done as it's supposed to. And there we go. And lastly, a feature related to charging, but doesn't require you to use anything in the menus, is this little 5-volt, 2.1 amp USB charger that I give you, which is awesome. You can charge your little FPV cameras with it, or your phone, or really anything. Now we'll take a look at the measuring tool function. So the measuring tool section supports inspection of PWM, PPM, SBUS receivers, and ESCs. So how can you test a receiver with this? I've got a little servo cable here that came with my r-xsr. I can plug it in just like this. And as you can see, it's lit up. And we can press OK to start measuring the SBUS receiver.
Welcome to OpenT.
I turned on my Tyrannus and
switch warning, angle mode on.
And now I can verify the receiver. Now as I move the throttle stick, the values change on the receiver as they should. And I can also test to see that, yeah, the receiver is bound up and it is responding to my input from my radio system. So really, really cool. It's nice to be able to test to verify that your receiver is actually working in the event that you're having some problem getting a response on your quad. You know, otherwise, if you don't have this feature, you would have to swap your receiver to a quad that's working, and that might not be available, and it's kind of annoying. So this solves that problem. If you just want to see that your receiver is working and that your problem lies in either your Betaflight config or what have you, this is great. It's a really quick solution to that. The measuring tool is also really great because it allows you to test the internal resistance of the batteries. So if we go to the battery testing interface, we can see that we have a voltage checker here that'll just give us our standard cell voltage checking. We can change to internal resistance, and we can run a test and see how our cells are doing. So this is going to tell you the health of your battery. I'm going to run it right now. And it's saying that my battery has about, up to 12 is my worst MR. So as a general rule of thumb, you look at the highest cell IR, and under or around 10 ohms is great. 15 ohms is good. 20 is bad, and I would just say you need to start thinking about retiring it when it gets into the lower 20s. There are some people that will honestly start to retire out the batteries when they're in their higher teens as well, but in general, that's the rule I go by when I check for resistance. So it's really great that this charger allows you to see your battery's health and see how it's doing. Going back to the voltage section here, you can also press the balance button. See, it's balancing out the battery cells, and you're doing it right here from the voltage screen. Also, I wanted to point out that if you don't have a power supply connected, that's okay. You can still plug in the main power lead and plug in the battery, and the voltage meter is going to come right up for you. See, I'm completely pulled from my power supply now, and there we go. It's taking power from the battery, and you get your voltage reading. The only thing that would really be nice is if it could just power itself from the voltage, and you could just skip this, but it is what it is. Moving on from the measuring tool, we can go to the power output feature of the charger. So the Toolkit M8 can turn itself into a step-up power supply, and it can supply power to receivers, or it can literally just be a power supply that outputs right here on this XT60. Now, why would you want this? Well, why wouldn't you want this? This becomes an instant power supply that can step up to any voltage that you want on the bench or in the field. Now, I've got a 12.4 volt power supply, but my TS100 soldering iron works best at 24 volts. So now what I can do is I can hook it up to the Toolkit M8. I've got this little cable here. And now I've got the voltage set to 24 volts with a limit of 8.1 amps, and I can click start. And my iron is actually set for a 6S battery at the moment, and it states it's fully charged. And look at how fast it's heating up. Because we can see here that we are outputting 24.9 volt, 23.9 volts, about 24 volts, and it's pulling a few amps. So yeah, look how fast that thing heats up on 24 volts. Now the other thing that you can use this feature for is for working with your quads on the bench. Alright, so before we power this thing up, we've got to change two things. I'm going to set the amp limit to 1, and there's a reason I'm doing that, and we'll get to that. Okay, the amp limit is 1, and we're going to go down to, just use 16, because I've got a 12 volt power supply, and again, it's cool to be able to emulate a 4S battery from a 12 volt power supply thanks to the voltage step up feature. So there we go, we've got it powered up. I've got my receiver powered up, and I'm going to turn this on here on my radio. Now this charger can act as a protector if you have a short in your build because of the 1 amp limit. So if you have a short, it's definitely going to be above 1 amp when you plug it in, and it will cut the power to it, unlike with a battery. The only problem is that it does react a little slowly. I'm going to show it to you. So I'm going to actually power up the motors, and we can see that we're going at 0.8 amps. Okay, and I'm going to increase the throttle a little bit, increase the throttle a little bit. Oh, see, look at that. I've got 1.1 amps, 1.3 amps. Yeah, it's not really stopping it. If I throttle all the way up, now I've got the overcurrent warning. So like I said, I don't know if I would really trust this to use it as a smoke stopper myself. But look at it this way. In the event that you are doing a new build and you decide to do your multimeter testing to see if you have any shorts, and just as one extra safety measure, I would go ahead and plug it in. You know, the worst case scenario is that it doesn't do anything and it still your electronics still blow anyway. It may or may not react in time to save it. But if you're like me, you have nothing else, it's better than not using any kind of short protection at all when you first give your build some juice. So I figured I would show this to you anyway, and it's definitely something that I'm going to be using going forward before I plug that first LiPo into any new drone builds that I do. Finally, we're down to the line here. We've reached the settings section. The settings section is pretty standard. We can have an input, lowest input, that's good for protecting a battery. If you're going to connect a battery instead of a power supply, you don't want to over discharge it. You can set the input power, the temperature. I've pretty much left all of this default. One really cool thing is that you can set the discharge mode from internal to recycle. So let's say you have batteries that you want to discharge, but you want to charge another one. You can plug a battery into here, and you can plug the one you want to cycle the power out of into here, and you could literally feed the power back into the battery. Really kind of a cool feature. Just don't do that while you have a power supply connected. That would be a really bad idea. Let's talk about a firmware issue that I have with this thing. So I'm running version 1.1.21. My Toolkit M8 shipped with version 1.18 or 1.18, and that had a very serious firmware bug preventing me from fully charging my batteries. The charger would throw a battery cell error on batteries that I knew were perfectly fine. I almost returned it. Keeping a charger that you can't even charge is really questionable. But I realized from researching in the forums that all I had to do was update the firmware and it would fix the problem. I think it's really poor that they shipped it with such bad firmware, but at the same time, at least ToolkitRC and Hobbymate are actively working on it. If you end up with this firmware or any other version that isn't behaving properly, in order to update it, you will need to use the included USB cable, and you're going to plug it into here and connect it to your computer, and then it'll kind of show up as an external drive. And then what you're going to do is you're going to drag and drop the firmware download from ToolkitRC into that external drive on your computer, and then it will write the firmware and update it. There are some people who had trouble doing this though, and I was actually one of them, because my Surface Book 2 laptop received an error and I simply couldn't get it to recognize the charger when I plugged it in. I ended up having to use an old HP laptop that managed to see it, but if that was my only computer, that would have been a pain in the butt. So it's just something to keep in mind. If you're not okay with updating firmware or are not savvy with things like that, then you would obviously want to take a pass on this. But you know, if you're in this hobby, you've probably already flashed firmware on something at some point. Now, I'm not excusing ToolkitRC or Hobbymate for shipping it out like that, but you know, I hope that this information will help in your consideration of it, because since I have updated the firmware, I've been very happy with it. By the time you watch this video, there's a good chance that all of the 1.18 units have already been sold out and are now gone. Alright, well, I guess that's about it. We've gone over all the settings and features that I feel are really relevant. If you have any questions, let me know down in the comments below. I would love to help you out with the charger, whether it be a question about a feature or the firmware updates. Please reach out to me. If you liked this video, please leave a thumbs up. If you didn't, well, you know where that button is. With that being said, I hope you have a great day, as always, and I guess I'm going to go do some charging.